Hey boys, this video is just going to go through our topic of simple interest. So there are two main formulas that you need to know for simple interest. The first is I equals PIN. Now what each of these letters stand for is capital I is your simple interest. So this is how much money you get after the loan has accrued its interest, whether that be a loan or something that you have invested. Your principal is P, so that is how many dollars are borrowed or invested. I is your interest rate, and it has to be as a decimal. And N is the number of years. Something you need to remember for calculating N is that there's 365 days in a year and there's 12 months in a year. The one other formula that you will need to use with this unit here is that A equals P plus I. What this formula finds is it finds the total amount. So the total amount earned or the total amount that you've had to repay to the bank. This is found by this formula. So P is your principal. So same as the first formula, that's the amount that's borrowed or invested. And then I stands for your simple interest. So you calculate that using our first equation, and then you can find the total amount. There may be some questions where you work backwards and you have to find, you're given the total amount and the principal, you then need to find the simple interest to then find the rate or the number of years. Those will be your more complex questions. So I'm just going to go through 4 questions now to show how those formulas are used, and then hopefully you'll be all good to go through your worksheets of LQ6 and SD3. So question 1 here, it says calculate the simple interest payable on a loan of $35,000 at a rate of 13% per annum for 3 years. So first thing, as soon as I see that this is a simple interest question, I write down my formula. So I equals PIN. I then go through the question and identify, well, what's the key information in the question? So it says here a loan of $35,000, so that's going to be my principal. I've got my time here of 3 years, that's going to be my N, and I've got a rate of 13%. That 13% is 0.13 as a decimal, and that is going to be my I value. What I then do is once I've identified each of those key pieces of information, I substitute them into my formula. So my principal is $35,000, my interest is 0.13, and my number of years is 3. Once you've plugged all of them into your formula, you then need to actually calculate what does that equal. So you've got 35,000 times 0.13 times 3. So you're going to have interest of $13,650. It just asks you to find that interest, so that is your solution and where you stop there. Our next type of question requires us to find the rate. So again, here it says determine the rate of interest that is charged if you earn, and then it gives us the values. So because I see straight away that it's an interest question, I know I'm going to need my formula, I equals PIN. I then need to find out, okay, well, what information do I know? So it says determine the rate of interest that is charged if you earn. So if I earn $900, that is my interest earned. So this is my capital I. It's after 4.5 years. So 4.5 years is my number of years. And it was on $5,000. So that's my principal. So I substitute this information into my formula. So I've got 900 equals 5,000 times, we don't know I, times 4.5. We then have a look and we say, okay, what do I need to do in order to move the 5,000 and 4.5 to the other side? Well, we have to divide. So you need to divide by 5,000 times 4.5. Now, it's completely fine if you find it easier to work with. You can evaluate what is that 5,000 times 4.5, which would be 22,500. and you can evaluate that before you move it. So you could then have 900 divided by 22,500 equals I. That's fine as well. You don't have to do that step, but that is something that you can do. We then need to actually work out what is that division. So 900 divided by 22,500 is 0.04, and that's your interest rate. Now remember that in the formula, our interest rate is put into a decimal. So our rate, we multiply that by 100, is 4% per annum. Our next example, we've got determine the amount borrowed. So if we're trying to find the amount borrowed, that is going to be our P. So we're not going to know what our principal is. The question then tells us that we've got a flat rate of 7.5%. The interest charged is $825, and the number of years is 5. So again, we write down our formula. So I equals PIN. We know our interest charged is $825. We don't know the principal. Our flat rate of interest as a decimal would be 0.075, and our number of years is 5. To rearrange that, we can evaluate this 5 times 0.075 first, if you prefer to do that. So if you multiply 5 by 0.075, you end up with 0.375. So you can write this line, you can have 825 equals P times 0.375, if that makes it a little bit easier for you. You then divide by 0.375. So you're going to have 825 divided by 0.375. And so you'll get 2,200 as your P. So your principal is $2,200. So that's how much would have been invested at the start to have accrued interest of $825. Okay, and our fourth example here, I'm going to go through 28 and 30 just because they give us our number of years in a different format. So for 28, this one here asks us to find the interest that will be paid and then calculating the total amount as well. So for 28, straight away, write down my formula, I equals PIN. Now it tells us that we have $397. So that's our principal. We've got 3.45% and we've got 18 months. So if I substitute this into my formula, I'm going to have I equals $397 is my principal. My interest rate, which is 3.45%, that's 0.0345. And then my number of years, this is currently in months. So to go from 18 months to years, we need to divide by 12. So you can write it as a fraction of 18 over 12. Now, if you prefer to have that as a decimal, you can obviously evaluate it where it's a terminating decimal. So this one here, it ends up as 1.5. But if that decimal is reoccurring or non-terminating, you need to leave it as a fraction for accuracy. What you then do is you can then get out your calculator. You would then plug in what is 397 times 0.0345 times 18 over 12, or 1.5, and you would get an interest earned of $20.54475. Now, once you've got that, we're not finished. So that is the interest paid. So you might say interest paid is 20.54. But you then also need to find the total amount paid. So remember that A equals capital P plus I. So that's our principal plus our interest. So we already know that our principal was 397. And we know that our interest was 20.54475. Now, please don't round until you get to your final step, so use this value that you got here. Otherwise, you can end up with a rounding error if your principal has decimals as well. Okay, so we then end up with our 20.54475 4,775 plus 397. So you'll end up with a total amount being repaid of $417.54. Okay, and our last example, I'm just going to do, just erase this little bit here. So our last example is question number 30. So again, our formula I equals PIN. The information we're given, principal 586.29. Our interest is 8.25%. Now remember, this is the same as saying 8.25%. So as a decimal, that's going to be 0.0825. And then we're given 90 days. So remember, 90 days, we need to go to years. So you're going to need to divide that by 365. And this is an example where you need to keep it as a fraction because it is a non-terminating, or it's a longer decimal. It does end up terminating, but it's a longer decimal where we can end up with a rounding error if you actually round it. So we've got 90 over 365 as our n. We then need to evaluate that, so it can be easier depending on what type of calculator you're using. If you're using the scientific one, please make sure you enter 90 over 365 as a fraction. So in this case here, we're going to have 586.29 times 0.0825. And then you're going to have times by 90 over 365. So if you type all of that into your calculator, multiplying them as you go, you'll end up with a solution of 11.9265842. So our interest paid is $11.93 if we round that to 2 decimal places. But then we need to find the total amount paid. So we do our A equals P plus I. Our principal we know was 586.29. Our interest is 11.9265842. We need to add that together. So we've got that value added together, and you'll get 598.216584. Then we round it. So it's approximately $598.22. We have a look at what is our third decimal, and then that tells us whether we go up or leave it the same. So 598.22 would be our total amount repaid on that question 30. Hopefully that helps you with getting through LQ6 and SD3. Obviously, please don't hesitate to reach out to your teacher if you need any further help.